So, Jay, as someone who works in the field of clean energy and climate change, what's your approach to individual change?
In different countries, you can do different things. In countries in Europe, it's quite easy to buy 100% of your energy from a renewable source. You can buy 100% of your gas from a renewable source. You can get access to technologies. Here in BC, we have a great grid, but that's where you don't have much choice. You can't switch different suppliers. So it's interesting what you can do. And on a personal basis, when it comes to flying, which is the single largest impact for most people, throughout my life, really focused on trying to offset, and in many cases even double or triple offset those emissions.
I mentioned earlier in my chat with Jackie that the average Canadian creates about 15.7 tons of carbon emissions every year.
Yeah.
What would your...
Now, currently, last time I looked, if I exclude flights in for my own personal transportation, I'm probably down around 4.5 tons. But I can't do anything about the ferry. And that's our biggest CO2 emission per person on Bowen. So there's things like that that are also difficult to deal with. But I do use public transport most of the time for most of the trips into town, 95%.
So what's your number one thing you wish people would do?
That's a good question because it always varies where you are. If you're really honest and you fly a lot, offsetting is far more important than anything else you can do. If you don't fly a lot, then it's going to be about things like diet. What are you doing? Are you moving more plant-based? Are you moving away from meats and dairy? And also it's going to be about your consumption patterns. There are people who buy a copious amount of stuff. For instance, an electric car is really great for reducing your emissions if you drive a lot. If you don't drive much, switching to an electric car actually doesn't reduce your emissions any significant way. If sustainability was easy, we would have done it by now. It's a complex thing. But the point that Jackie was making is there's hundreds of things we can do. And some of those things are small, reusing, repairing. Some of those things are bigger, changing your diet. Some of those things are huge, I won't fly anymore. But it's about what's appropriate. And this is not a process of individual action only. This is the aggregate. And the whole point that I've spent most of my career is working with the 5 or 10 or 15% of society that are aware of this stuff. Most of my career now is working with 60, 70% of society who isn't. Because there's no point in helping someone who's pretty good get even better. This is about taking people who are average and making them marginally better. Because that's the aggregate that matters.
So on a community level, what's the low-hanging fruit for us? What should we as members of this Bowen Island community be asking or working towards if we want to make really an impact as an island?
The biggest impact for us is our ferry and our food. Our ferry is 40% of our carbon emissions. Now that's something that's challenging because it's not ours. We don't own it, we don't operate it. We work with a Crown Corporation through the government, and that's about lobbying and working with and saying let's change faster than current plans. The current plans for the electrification of the ferry fleet are there, but they're still quite far out. Bowen could hit all of our CO2 targets just with the electrification of our ferry. So that's humongous. Now when you start looking at the next piece, it's really about food. But yeah, we should also be improving our homes, making them more efficient. Heat pumps are a great example of 300% efficiency over electric heating. If you have a house on Bowen and you're using gas for heating, a heat pump is a phenomenal 98% reduction in carbon emissions. So if you have the luxury of voting is your single biggest action, but voting needs to be followed up with more than just that.